Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this SICC event. It's the fourth installment of our Mindfulness at Work series in 2021. And I'm so grateful to Ronnie Sabnani, the managing principal of Infinye, for being our guest speaker throughout this series. And I will let Ronnie explain how we've put this together in order for one session to build on and lead into the next. And today we're going to focus on authentic, selfless leadership and what that means for businesses and what it means for the people who work in those businesses. I've just finished a couple of weeks ago being part of the Alliance for Action for Work-Life Harmony. And there I worked in a group of people who we came up with a series of guides for businesses, for leadership teams, boards and senior managements, for employees, for people managers, really to help encourage more businesses to think about how important a positive workplace culture is for business and commercial success. It enables engaged teams. It enables talent to be developed and to be retained. It enables happy repeat customers. And it all starts with authentic, selfless leadership. So to take us through this fourth chapter in this year's story, please welcome our guest speaker, Mr. Ronnie Sabnani, the managing principal for Infinye Incorporated. Ronnie, over to you.
Thank you, Victor. Wonderful introduction, as always. And ladies and gentlemen, it is my absolute delight and pleasure to have the opportunity to go through what is the final installment of our series on mindfulness at work with you this wonderful Thursday morning, 28th of October. I fully agree with so many of the things Victor has just highlighted, and I'm sure many of you have found yourself asking questions around what it really takes, given what's happened in the last 2 years. What do we do in order to ensure that we still maintain that laser focus, that we still have that ability to take stock of where we are in life, appreciate all the things that are available to us, and also take the necessary actions to be authentic, to be selfless where we can, in making our lives overall and the ones around us much, much better. So I would like to talk you through what we have discovered and what we've talked about and found through our own experiences, the ways that which people, through authenticity, through the fact of being more aware, through the fact of being able to communicate at the right levels, how they can develop that sense of leadership and do it with a high degree of integrity. Now, one of the things Victor highlighted, he didn't say anything about leaders. He's talked about how we can all, as our own individuals, become a leader in our own right. And that's something I would like all of you to think about. I would like all of you to consider, regardless of your role in the organization, in your family unit, in your social structure. We all have that potential and capability to be leaders at some time or another, and be leaders that people draw themselves towards and are able to resonate with the right sort of values. So if you look at what's up on the screen, I think this picture best captures this whole series that we talked about. Starting in January, we went through 3 different installments before coming today for this 4th one, right? And at the end of today, our hope for all of you is that you each can achieve an environment, a situation very much like the one that's depicted in this picture here. So let's get started, shall we? Let me just start off by asking all of you this. If you look at the screen over here, tell me if you can share with me, who are these people? Look at all the photos over here on this particular screen. Who are these guys? Who are these wonderful ladies and gentlemen that you see on the screen? Go ahead, just type your answer on a chat. I don't need names of who they are, but what do these images represent? What do you guys think? Yeah? So we've got some great answers over here. Yes, by and large, they're all viewed quite often as leaders in their respective areas. Okay, great. So we all recognize these guys very instantly, no doubt about that. Now, here's what I want to do. I want to start off by asking you a very simple question. As individuals in your respective organizations, what type of leaders do you tend to gravitate towards? So go ahead, share your answers on the poll that comes up over there, and then we'll have a bit of a chat around that. What type of leaders do you prefer? Do you gravitate towards? Great, thank you. Wonderful answers coming in, everyone. Awesome to see that. Just wait for a few more. Most of you have given your answers. Tell me, do you gravitate towards a charismatic speaker, a team player, a coach? How about someone with a growth mindset? Someone who's a bit more action-oriented, goal-oriented? What do you feel about those sorts of individuals? Yeah, okay, so let's end the poll, share with you the results. I think it's very interesting to see, and I see some very interesting trends over here, everyone. Thank you for sharing with us your thoughts on that. What's clear is that from this particular quick poll that we've done, most of you gravitate towards a leader who acts more as a coach. And a large majority of you also look at someone who is a team player, as well as someone who has a growth mindset. Now, we've done a much larger survey or count, based on this particular question. And let's have a look at what the statistics actually show. So if you can stop sharing that poll results, we'll move on to the next slide. Yep. So based on all the research that's been done over the last few years, what has emerged is quite an interesting trend in leaders that we prefer to work with. Employees, all of us prefer leaders who are, some prefer charismatic speakers. But if you look at this particular graph, everyone, one very clear and overwhelming statistic stands out. And that is a lot of us tend to gravitate towards leaders who have a growth mindset, a leader who has an infinite mindset, as I refer to it. And someone like that requires a certain degree of qualities, a range of qualities, which allows them to be successful, but not only allowing them to be successful, allows them and their teams around them to be successful. Quite often, those with a growth mindset are known as people who practice the art or the science of transformational leadership. And I want to talk a bit about how this actually goes into what our topic is around today with regards to leading with integrity. Now, if you look at all of this, what I think was interesting is charismatic speakers, the team player, the director, the one who delegates and directs things all around. Those are the ones who actually form the lower part of the statistics in this particular question. And even someone like a coach does not actually represent as much as we all like to think. Why is that? When we look at leaders, and if we look at this same graphic that I shared with you earlier on, there's one common characteristic that stands out amongst the true leaders from the wannabes or from those that get embroiled in different sorts of scandals. So if you look at this particular screen again with all these images, When you take away the charismatic speakers, when you take away the ones who are so focused on getting things done their way that nothing else matters, when they take away the ones who are inward with regards to their own personal motivations, you start to see quite a different picture. Quite a few of these guys actually fall off. And the common thing that the ones up on the screen share is this concept of integrity. What is integrity? I'm not going to go into the dictionary and talk about the definition of it. All of you are well aware of what the word integrity means in your respective lives. But have a look at the remaining people on the screen, the remaining images on the screen. That tells you already that they all have a very unique quality around how they interact with their people, the people around them, how they have the courage to actually take the right actions, even when it may not seem to be in their favor, how they have the drive and the perseverance to be able to stick to their path, to use truth as their guiding light, to be authentic, regardless of the hardships, regardless of the struggles, regardless of the naysayers. And all of these people, all of these leaders that you see over here are the ones with a high degree of integrity. How did they achieve that? Is it something they're born with or something that's developed? Well, everyone, the good news is it is something that can be nurtured and developed over time. And it involves just combining two very key components. One, understanding the morality with which we live our lives. And two, from that morality, the values that we have understood and defined and feel are part of us, how consistently do we apply it in our actions? And ladies and gentlemen, the wonderful thing about being a leader with integrity, that their sweet spot of the balance between morality and consistency is where we would have the ability to develop that integrity. It's where leaders with integrity come from. So think about it this way. And as we go into the rest of our session today, I want you to keep coming back to this particular graphic that you see over here. Having that right balance of morality with a consistent approach towards how each and every one of our actions are defined, that's where you're going to be able to leverage that high degree of integrity. That's where not only will you be able to leverage it, that's where your integrity shines right through. So before we do that, I want to pause over here. And I want to start off by just sharing with you a personal story, a bit of a personal story, right? Now, some of you who attended our previous session would have remembered that I used to work in a large technology organization several years ago. I'm thinking back to a time about 15 and a half years ago when I was with this one tech organization. And we had gone on a trip. A few of us, including my manager, had to go to India to deal with a situation that we had with an existing client. Now, that was a long trip. It was exhaustive because we had to really make lots of remediation type of actions in order to sort out what was the mess that had been left by our predecessors in that particular organization. Through no one's fault of their own, we were left with having to deal with the fallout from what was a very messy and error-strewn implementation of the solution that we were selling. So part of our trip, well, a large part of our trip was meant to culminate in this big solution demonstration, in this big presentation that we had to do to the executives at the end of the 2-week time that we were spending out there. And for that demonstration, it was effectively myself, 2 of my colleagues, Raj and Michael, and of course, my boss. His name is Steve. We 4 were meant to put everything together in order to deliver that final presentation with recommendations to this executive board at the end of the 2 weeks. I'm going to pause on my story there and come back to it, and you'll know why I'm sharing with you this particular story. But as we go and talk about integrity, I want you to just also keep that at the back of your mind. I worked for a technology organization 15 years ago. We were in India, miles away from our home here in Singapore, all having to work towards building a presentation that we had to deliver to the board at the end of this 2 weeks. So I'll come back to that later on during our session. So speaking about integrity, and as Victor said, this is a series that we've been running for the whole year. We talked about mindfulness at work. We started off talking about how it's important within the concept of mindfulness that there are 4 stages. The first is having the right mindset. And we talked about how are some of the ways we can actually leverage in order to develop that mindset way back in January. Then we went on and spoke about how we can communicate with intent. What are some of the things we can do in order to ensure that our messages are received in the way we intended? Further on in July, we talked about this concept of empathy and how through engaging with empathy, we can see some amazing outcomes amongst our teams. Ladies and gentlemen, what I would like to share with you is all of this was a build-up towards this particular session today for us to talk about how we can lead with integrity. Essentially, over here, all those 3 components that we went through previously, they form what I call the building blocks of leadership integrity. So if you look at having the right mindset, what are the elements within that in order to develop that optimum mindset in order to interact with our peers as well as friends? If you talk about communication, how do we really communicate with the right intention at every step of the way to ensure our messages are not only received as how we intended, but that they have positive outcomes from them? And of course, we talked about the empathic engagement. How do we engage with empathy? What are the different elements of empathy that we should be aware of? And how does that play a part into how we communicate, how we interact, and just as importantly, how we lead our teams? So, ladies and gentlemen, these 3 that we talked about in the previous installments are all building blocks of being able to develop a leader who has a high degree of integrity. One who is selfless, one who is authentic, as Victor highlighted, and who is always seen to do the right things, no matter the circumstances. But it's not only about doing the right things, it's also about making sure that they can carry the rest of the team together with them to that next level. So for the remainder of the sessions, I just want to do a quick recap of what each of these building blocks actually represent and how combining all of them, they form the foundation for us to create those leaders with a high degree of integrity. Starting with that first building block, developing the right mindset. We spoke about how developing the right mindset involves us understanding how we respond and what we do with respect to what we see, what we hear, and what we feel. The visuals, the auditory, and the emotional component of everything that we're doing go a long way towards us being able to develop that right mindset. And I just want to help refresh your memory with regards to what are the key things we're talking about when we talked about these 3 components within the first building block. When we spoke about the visuals, the key message over here was not to just see, but really take in. So one of the highlights that we mentioned during that first session was when we think about visuals, we should not just be looking, we should not just be seeing, we should also be absorbing. Why is that, ladies and gentlemen? Well, 55% of communication is visual. And that's primarily because what the eye see allows us to make those decisions and understand a situation quicker. What we see what the eyes do is that they have the ability to process larger amounts of data. And because of that, because of this ability to process large amounts of data, what we see is responsible for over 70% of the decisions or actions that we do and make at that particular point in time, in any circumstance. Think about it, 70% of the decisions, 70% of our actions are predetermined to a large extent by what we see. Which is why it's important to not just look, not just see, but really take it all in. Be more aware of what you're looking at. Process it in that way, absorb it in a way so that you can understand how to set up your mindset in order to interact effectively. The other component of the right mindset is the auditory. And again, over here, ladies and gentlemen, we talked about the fact that we shouldn't just be hearing, we should also be listening. In fact, we introduced a concept and we talked about the concept of active listening, where you should have greater focus into any conversation or interaction that you are in. Why? Again, 38% of communication is through the auditory route. So 55% is visuals, whereas 38% is through the auditory route. Again, a significant chunk. And if we don't practice the concept of active listening, if we don't apply the concept of sensory listening, that means not just listening with our ears, but also with the rest of our senses, it becomes a lot more difficult for us to develop that open mindset in order to tackle any situation. And I always use this little phrase to help me along the way, to remind me that when I'm listening to any individual in any circumstance, do not jump. That means do not judge. Do not do unnecessary talking. There's a reason, ladies and gentlemen, that we have 2 ears, but only 1 mouth. We're all meant to listen more than we should be speaking. What's also important is when we're listening, we don't make it about ourselves. And don't be so quick to prepare a response. So think about it again. Developing that right mindset involves us being able to practice the concept of active listening, where we listen with all our senses and where we can have that high degree of focus. Here's an interesting fact that you guys should be aware of. Most people still never listen. So people will notice the difference if you actually listen. So that's the thing that you should always be remembering, right? Most people never listen, but then people can gauge and tell straight away and notice the difference when they see you listening. The third component of that right mindset building block is around how we manage our emotions. And this has a large part towards how mindful we are about anything and everyone around us. So the recommendation over here, ladies and gentlemen, is to not just feel, but refrain. What do I mean by that? Well, remember that beneath the surface of every feeling, there is a story. Think about it a bit more. Don't just react to circumstances. Be able to process your and other people's emotions and be comfortable with them. Any volatile situation can be more easily diffused if we take that approach of not reacting. If we are comfortable by understanding what are the respective emotions at play in that situation, process them accordingly, understand what the story is behind that feeling, and then be able to take the necessary steps to act and process it in the right way and to have that mindset. So not just process the emotions, challenge the story that our emotions or their emotions are telling us, and in the process, build up our own emotional vocabulary. We talk how about so many words have the same meanings, And quite often, we as human beings tend to take for granted that when we say, I'm okay, the other party understands what we're talking about, understands what we're actually feeling. But I'm okay can mean so many different things. So build your emotional vocabulary to expand on a phrase like that. So those were the elements of the first building block, how we can develop the right mindset. Now, before we go to the next one, I want to again call out and ask you guys what you think. I'm going to run a little poll over here and tell me, what do you think are the leadership skills most important in your mind, from your perspective? What skills are most important for a leader to have? Select as many of them as you feel are important, guys. It's not a single choice option. Oh, sorry, my mistake. It is a single choice option. So out of all of these over here, I'm not saying that they aren't, that all of them aren't, but which one to you is the most important? Yeah, and again, we're seeing some wonderful answers over here, which is very much in line with what we're talking about. Okay, and let's end that poll. We can share the results just to show you what that looks like. So everyone, I think it's interesting. A large majority of you think authenticity is the key. And you are absolutely spot on with that. If you look at some of the others, courage, good communicator also plays a large part in having a good leader or in developing a good leader. But looking at authenticity, let's think a bit more about what that actually entails. From our point of view, it actually is representative of the two building blocks that we're about to talk about. Okay, so we'll just end sharing and we'll move on to the next one. Okay, so building block 2 is really around communicating with intent. We talked about this in April. And in April, we talked about how within the concept of communicating with intent, there are, again, 3 simple things, 3 core areas that we should be thinking about. 1, being able to build that awareness. Self-awareness is key in anyone, let alone a leader. But as a leader, this becomes a much greater trait that we should be looking to develop. And that builds on that first building block of visuals and auditory. If we listen actively, if we don't just see but absorb, we have then that ability to really build the awareness. If we look for both the verbal and non-verbal cues, that helps us as well. But building awareness here is not just about awareness of what's happening around us, but also a simple exercise of awareness of ourselves. What are our strengths in our point of view? Where do we feel we have some limitations? How do we own up to those limitations? Do we own up to those limitations? How do we push our own ego out of the door and focus instead on how we can help ourselves as well as others around us rise to that next level? So that's all about building awareness. Then we talked about the concept of how using the right words matter. And we also talk about the importance of being able to establish resonance whenever we're communicating with anyone in any circumstance. Now, building awareness is a lot about us understanding the personal filters. What do I mean by that, everyone? If you recall, we talked about how every individual that we communicate with, whether in a face-to-face environment, whether on a Zoom environment like this particular session over here, every single individual has their own personal filter with which they receive communication, with which they receive the words from you and every one of their other colleagues. And it is this filter that has an impact on bias. It is this filter that has an impact on the actions that are eventually carried out. It is this filter that determines how much of what you're communicating actually lands in the way you intended. And you can help align yourself or mirror yourself with that filter by also using the right words. This is an area that I'm always very particular about with anyone that we talk to. People often underestimate the power of some of the words. Yeah. If you've heard of the old phrase, sticks and stones may break our bones, but names will never hurt me. Well, I have a different view on that, ladies and gentlemen, because I feel in the life that we are in, the landscape that we all live in now, words play a much stronger role in the way it can actually have an impact on any individual. So one of the recommendations we have shared with you is build up your good and bad buckets, where you know what are the type of questions, what are the types of words you would use in any scenario, and think about whether they fall into the good bucket or into the bad bucket. So as a leader, if you're trying to communicate something to someone, instead of saying, why don't you do this? What you could say is, where this has worked for me in the past is it was done this way. Instead of saying, why wouldn't you just finish this at that particular time? You could consider rephrasing that and think about saying, have you thought about doing it this way? Instead of, why don't you just do it the way I told you to do it? So these particular two examples are just one of few of many that we should be thinking about when we are structuring the words that actually go into every narrative, commentary, and dialogue that we have with our peers and people around us. So build up, take the time, guys, to build up those two buckets. Think about the type of questions you would ask and how, with a little tweak, it can be much more impactful. Think about the type of words you use when you're communicating with the colleagues and how, with just a slight adjustment, you can see an end result in a smile and in a positive action as opposed to one that is not. Yeah. So over time, you start to build these two buckets in a nice way. And before long, you will find yourself not needing the bucket on the right, because you've got such a comprehensive library of words and phrases that you would use, which you know are designed to land with the individual that you're talking to in the right way. Why? Because with those words, you then have the ability to establish resonance. And established resonance is very largely due to the fact that we firstly are aware of the circumstances. We know what are the words to use. We know what is the emotion behind our words. That means what is our intention behind those words. And then it makes it a lot easier for us to strike that perfect chord. It makes it much more straightforward for us to be able to convey the meaning of what we're trying to say effectively to influence the outcomes that we're looking for. What we're trying to do then is, by striking that perfect chord and conveying the meaning accordingly, we are then able to establish that high degree of resonance. And when you have that resonance, there's that synchronization. When you have that resonance, the ability for those messages to be retained by others goes up significantly. So building block 2 is about building that awareness. It's about using the right words. It's about understanding how we can convey meaning in what we say in order to establish that resonance. And then that allows us to move very easily to building block 3, where we can engage effectively utilizing the 3 elements of empathy. Now, everyone, if you recall, we talked about different aspects of empathy. One being cognitive. How, by understanding a situation and relaying or conveying that understanding to the other party, it shows a certain degree of support. Or how, by relating to that situation, because we ourselves have experienced this before, we are making the other individual really feel that we are not only listening, but that we have been there before, we have experienced the same thing that they may be going through, and as a result, are sharing in their discomfort, are sharing in perhaps their frustration. And when people see that level of mirroring that you are able to display through the use of your effective empathy, you then start again to see the right outcomes. We also talked a bit about the element of compassionate empathy. And this is something that is very much connected to the emotions that we utilize in any interaction. So cognitive empathy, how we use logic to define and determine a circumstance. Effective empathy, how we use our own experience to be able to interact and push that process or circumstance forward in the right direction. And compassionate empathy, how through our own experience of feelings and emotions, it could have even been the roller coaster of emotions that we've gone through, how through all of that, we have that battle-hardened aspect in order to handle any particular situation. All of these guys are what will go into us being that empath. And why is this important? What does empathy actually do? Well, I'm sure you have seen that in your respective areas, in different situations you've been. One of the things that empathy actually helps do is build that trust. When someone hears that you understand, when someone sees that you are taking all the right steps to understand, not only understand what you feel, but also have been there and know what to do, that creates a high degree of trust. When we have mirror neurons in our brain that actually relate to how we leverage our empathy levels. And mirror neurons in our brain is what leads us to becoming more authentic. So we can build that trust. Not only that, when they see that level of empathy that you are displaying, people are more inclined to stand up and be counted. People are more inclined to get into the trenches with you. And people are more emboldened to take the steps, knowing that you, their manager, or you, the leader, or you, their colleague, have experienced this before, can understand the potential outcomes and the circumstances around the potential outcomes, and therefore they're not alone. Therefore, they have the courage to go out and then stand up and say, yes, I took this decision and I'm accountable for my actions. And by building that trust and promoting that accountability, we can then look towards being able to produce results consistently, day in, day out, week in, week out, month in, month out. And it's no secret, ladies and gentlemen, of the impact of empathy on leadership. 93% of employees stay with an empathetic leader. 82% leave for an empathic leader. That is a damning statistic. 93% will stay. So think about that level of loyalty that you can build within your teams and organizations. But at the same time, 82% will leave for a leader that displays a high degree of empathy. And when you have the time, ladies and gentlemen, test yourself. There are loads of quizzes or self-guided assessments you can take on the internet to see what level of an empath you actually are. And regardless of where you land in the scoring system on any one of these tests, one thing I would share with you is, hey, don't take that in any way other than the fact that it is an opportunity for you to perhaps develop different elements of your empathy chart. Okay, so think about it from that perspective. Go out and set. I've just put over here a few tests which I have found to be really useful, and it'll be wonderful when you have a bit of time. Quite fun, some of these tests as well, because it asks you such random questions sometimes, and you wonder what has that got to do with empathy. But then once you see the results, you then start to get that aha moment. So speaking about empathy, let me stop that and come back on video. Remember that story I talked to you about at the start? Here we are. Let's go back down to that particular situation. So as I said, we're in India working with the team on building this presentation that we have to present to the executives. It was a very tough time over there, I can tell you that. So the day before the actual presentation, this was about 7 o'clock in the evening. We were just going through the last final touches of our presentations. We all knew the roles each of us had. I knew the role I had. Mike and Raj knew the roles they had. My boss, Steve, knew the role that he had to play. He was meant to open up the presentation, and provide a bit of an outline in terms of what we're going to be doing, talk about the key areas where we're looking to help this customer, and then hand it over to us. All right. So we're going through this at 7 in the evening. At about 7:30, I get a call from home in Singapore. And I find out that my 10-month-old son was hospitalized. Now, being a first-time father at that point in time, that was my first child, I obviously panicked. And, flustered totally. Steve sat with me and worked our way towards what we could do, given that we were out there, right? So immediately, as soon as he heard it, as I said to him, said, "Steve, this is what's happened. My son's in the hospital, some unknown sort of infection that he's picked up somewhere. I am really worried. I am really anxious about what's going to happen. And here I am, thousands of miles away, not being able to do anything." So for the next few hours, despite how late it was, despite the fact that we had something to do, a big presentation to do the next day, Steve did everything he could. First thing he did to me when I told him the news, he says, "Okay, do you need to get on a plane?" That's the first thing he said to me. And I said, "I don't know. I should, I guess, try, because I want to get back there and see what's happening." So we tried, couldn't get any flights out. No matter what class or whatever we tried, couldn't get any flights out. Still didn't know what was going on, right? And then he asked me one very interesting question towards the end of the night, when we knew I wasn't going to be able to fly out that day. He says, "Good, you can take the flight out the first thing in the morning, if that's what you want to do." I went, "Look, the flight that's going to be at 11. And there's another flight at 1. We have our presentation first thing in the morning. I think I should just stay and deliver that presentation." And he says, "Look, you don't have to, but if that's what you want, we can do that. And then you leave straight away after that." I went, "Okay, fine." Next morning turns up, packed the bags, got ready for our presentation, went over to the customer site, and Steve stands up and delivers the opening. And here's an interesting thing that happened. As he delivered his opening, he then turns to the rest of the customers over there. Remember, this is the executive board. We have a situation, but let me say this. We would like to request for an extension just on this one particular module that we were meant to go through with you. And I set up, because that was the module that I was meant to deliver. Can we not, I would appreciate it if we can get that option to do this another time. And if that is something that all of you, Mr. Customer, cannot accommodate, that's fine. We will respectfully not progress or proceed with this next stage. So here I was sitting thinking, wow, what did Steve do just there? And then I called him aside and I said, look, let's just do this. I'm here. I'm okay. I will do this. And then we'll leave after that. So again, he asked me, are you sure about that? Because given the circumstances, no one's going to expect you to do that. I said, no, that's fine. Two things happened, ladies and gentlemen. I delivered the presentation, my part of the presentation. Yep. And a day after we delivered this presentation, when I had already left right after the presentation, Steve and the rest of my colleagues had stayed. A day after we delivered the presentation, the customer calls Steve, and this is something they don't do because they're very particular about it. They were still in the middle of their evaluation with the other vendors. Customer calls Steve and says to him, what you guys did yesterday was amazing. Firstly, thank you for sharing with us that there was a challenge. But more importantly, the way Ronnie delivered his presentation at that point in time was the most amazing example of how someone finally showed us how to use that system in that particular way. So we ended up getting the deal. The customer ended up not going forward with any of the other two competitors that they were still scheduled to do. And the biggest thing for me was this. Steve had a fan in him for life. He had someone who was able to follow him and respect and also understand that there'll be someone in his corner no matter when this happens, what any sort of event happens. And guess what, ladies and gentlemen? 6 months after that, he moved on to another organization. Guess where I went? I went to the other organization. 3 years later, he left because of circumstances that he was dealing with and took a bit of a break. And then joined another organization after a 6-month break. Guess where I went when he joined that other organization? Yeah, I went there as well. Yeah. So all of that was possible because of the empathy that he had shown me, because of the fact that throughout the entire episode, he was fully aware of the feelings I went through, I was experiencing. He was fully aware of the circumstances that we as an organization were in. And he was courageous enough, but truthful enough and authentic about standing up right at the start with a very irate customer, customer that has already had issues with us in the past, that we've had issues with in the past, and actually have the ability to say, we're not going to be able to do this section. And if you think this is critical, then we respectfully would like to withdraw. So think about that in the concept of what we talked about, everyone. How having that right mindset, how having the ability to communicate with the right intentions, and just as importantly, how empathy across the different levels can do so much in terms of the people we interact with and how we portray ourselves to the outside world. Which is why, as I said, we talk about the building blocks of leading with integrity. Having that right mindset is key. Being able to communicate with intent is also one that puts us on the right path. And then engaging with empathy. All these three, ladies and gentlemen, are the building blocks that help us through the way we interact, through the actions that we make. All of these are the building blocks that help us really build out a structure that is strong, where we have the right mindset, communicate with intent, and engage with empathy. And as a result, be able to construct something where we can, as individuals, have that courage and peace of mind of leading with integrity. And if practiced diligently, this is what mindfulness is all about. It's about us being able to develop the self-awareness of body, of thought, of emotions, and having the right intentions and how these shape our behaviors and how we are then perceived by the others around us. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's come back to what we started to talk about at the start of the year. 4 stages of mindfulness. 1, being able to have the right mindset. 2, it is also us being able to communicate every single time with the right intentions. 3, having the ability to empathize with others, regardless of the conditions, regardless of the circumstances, knowing which aspect of empathy that we can leverage naturally, not forcefully. And all of these 3, ladies and gentlemen, are the ones that form the basic building blocks to allow us as individuals to live a life of integrity and be able to lead a team, and lead a life of integrity as well. So mindfulness plays a large part, and especially, and I know we say this over and over again, especially given what's happened in the last 2 years, we cannot stress how important that whole concept of mindfulness really plays in the current climate. Because ultimately, what mindfulness does for us is it offers us that clear path. With the awareness of one's own mental processes and capabilities, and the understanding of how our mind works, how our emotions play a part, we can often go down a very clear path where we can address challenges and adversity in a non-judgmental way, in a non-threatening way. And that's a great thing to be able to do, right? We can also then, mindfulness ultimately offers us that ability to be present. And being present, everyone, is key towards us really taking in what is around us, really making the most of our respective lives. Being present means being aware of us, listening in wholeheartedly, being sensitive to the reactions in any stressful situation so that we don't panic, so that we don't go through and say, what? How do we handle this? What do we do there? And ultimately, what mindfulness will actually offer us is that ability to ensure that we don't become the victims of reactive thoughts and emotions that arise in the heat of the moment. Rather, we are able to choose a response that is much more aligned with our values. We are able to, excuse me, we are able to have a response which ensures that we're comfortable with it. And ultimately, that then allows us to live with integrity. So as we end off our session for today, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to remind you of, besides these particular components that mindfulness offers, at the workplace, there have been loads of studies that have shown the impact of mindfulness on different aspects. Just 10 minutes of a day focus on mindfulness. And no matter what you do, no matter how you do it, some of you might think, I need to meditate. Some of you might think, I need to go and play a round of golf. No matter what you do, just remember that to each his own, which means whatever it is you do, just spend that 5 or 10 minutes a day, focus on taking stock of where you are, get a reflection of yourself, understand what you can do, what you can influence, and understand, don't be afraid to also acknowledge that there are certain things that you need support on, certain things that you need help on. Spending that 5 to 10 minutes a day goes a long way towards us having so many positive outcomes. And we've seen the studies over here. Ultimately, it helps to reduce stress by a significant amount. Ultimately, productivity at our workplace and in our lives goes up significantly. And for those of us in a work environment, the cost of doing things, it's not always measured by monetary aspects, but the cost of doing things goes down significantly as well. Those are the things I would like to leave you with, guys. And I'll pause over here, turn it back to Victor or to the rest of you to ask if there's anything about what I talked about that I can help to clarify.
Ronnie, thank you so much. Another very interesting and thought-provoking session. Ladies and gentlemen, Grant has started the ball rolling by typing the first question into the chat. Feel free to do that with your questions. And if you're comfortable, we would love you to switch on your videos when you ask your questions, because it's so much nicer for me and for Ronnie. So if you're not having a bad hair day, do turn on the video. Before I get to Grant's question, as I'm going to take the privilege of being the moderator to ask a couple of questions to Ronnie first, and that will give time, hopefully, for more of our audience to ask their questions. And ladies and gents, if you don't feel like typing in your question, you can put your hand up, and either I or my team will see you, and then we can go from there, and you can pose your question. Ronnie, you started off the year in January with us on the importance of having the right mindset. And we know from everything we see around us in society today that mindset change is so hard. Take, for example, the problem we have with ageism, not only in the workforce, but in society as a whole. Now, most people who are my age and older get it because we are my age and older. But the fact is that this is something that is relevant to everybody, because everybody, all things being equal, barring a catastrophe, are going to get to the same point. Just a question of time and when. And how do we change mindsets? I'm not specifically asking you to delve deep into the anti-ageism thing unless you want to, but in the concept of mindfulness and mindset change, how do we do that? And how do we get more people to do that too? So we can have a more impactful, more productive, more happy society and workplace and workforce.
All right, thank you for that, Victor. And just to be clear, I don't think the concept of ageism should be in any way applied to you, Victor, because having known you for this long, you know, I feel you are far more young and youthful than many people I know.
You might be in a minority of one there, but thank you very much. It's very kind of you to say so. Go ahead.
So my simple response to that, and I'm not saying do this and it'll be perfect or this or that, but what has worked for me, everyone, is I don't set lofty or large goals or challenges in order to make those changes that I feel are necessary. If you think about it, and the little steps, one thing I would ask you to do is always celebrate the small wins, always celebrate the little things, because before you know it, a little win, a little progress actually snowballs into a much larger outcome within a very short time. Yeah. If you think about it, how we do things, how our mindset actually determines our actions, we are often encumbered by that feeling of negativity or cynicism where we're saying, okay, I don't want to change this. I can't change my way of thinking because it's never worked out before. Then my recommendation, stop, pause, right? Just take it in and process what are the circumstances over there. What are the things I can do? Forget about everyone else. What are the things I can do to make things better for me? There is a phrase that has been created by mother of a very famous US Olympian gymnast, not Simone Biles, another one, right? But there was a phrase, and I remember watching that TV movie a few years ago. Today is going to be better than yesterday. Simple phrase like that. And I think that goes a long way towards how that can even impact us from a mindset perspective. Be open. Be able to receive. And when I say receive, that means anything, good or bad. But when you do receive it, then instead of reacting, process it. Think about the emotions, as I said, rather than just feeling it and reacting, reframe. Understand whether there is an origin story behind that circumstance. And what then happens is that it allows us to be more calm and also allows us to be in a position where our mind and body, so to speak, would be open towards adjusting ourselves for a positive outcome. Okay, I would say celebrate the small steps. Don't think big all at one time, because that is the biggest obstacle for us. When we say, I have to change my way of thinking around this, just by changing our way of thinking, that phrase alone, it's the way, it's our way. It becomes difficult to just do that overnight. But perhaps think about it. Okay, in the next 5 situations I get myself in, let me try and change it for one of it, and let's see. That's what I would do.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I learned this week is just the importance of being open to learning. And I know we talk in Singapore all the time about continual learning, and it's, you know, they're 2 buzzwords, but it's absolutely true. And I had the opportunity to be in a panel earlier this week and met a friend whom I hadn't seen for a while. She used to be a journalist with the Business Times and is now pivoting to how to encourage more parents to bring up their children with respect, what she calls respectful parenting. And she made this wonderful analogy that if you want someone to change their mind, you need to change tack yourself. And this comes back to your point about self-awareness and being mindful. So she applies the same tactics to managing the tantrums of her toddler as she does to high maintenance egos in the business world. And it's just fascinating. And it kind of really resonated with me, because as you can imagine in this job, I meet plenty of high maintenance egos. But really great answer. Let's take Grant's question. And Grant, if you want to unmute yourself and ask it, feel free.
Sure. Thank you so much, Victor, for that. Yeah, the question, I typed it in chat there as well, too. Ronnie, from your experience or the research that you have done as well, too, that what would you say is the #1 thing that gets in the way of leading with integrity? I mean, is it around corporate politics and navigating the politics within an organization, straining goals or bonuses linked to these goals, for example, Enron or something else that might be getting in the way of leading with integrity?
Simple answer I would have for that, Grant, is ourselves. That is the #1 thing that gets in the way, right? When I say ourselves, we expand on that. If we have the mindset where we are in a leadership position and our motivation, our personal motivation is all about reaching those milestones, getting the bonus, like in Enron, right? Being able to please our bosses, because that's what we've been hired to do. If those are all about us being looked at in a better light, in a positive light, if that's what motivates it, I feel that's the biggest obstacle towards being able to lead with integrity. So being able to do that self-reflection, understanding our vulnerabilities, understanding where we have the limitations, and being open about it. Having a mindset, and I'm not sure if any of you have read the book, but I would highly encourage you to read this book, The Infinite Mindset by Sinek. Having an infinite mindset where you are aware the role that you play in any organization is not one to get them to this endpoint, but it's one where you continually are making sure you your organization stays in the game. The game never ends. Of course, there are these little milestones that you can celebrate with the wins. But if you have that mindset where you're thinking first and foremost, not about your bonus, not about how you look in front of your bosses, not about how you look in front of your team members, but really on what you can do to help everyone collectively, including yourself, rise to the next level, I feel that puts you on that path to being able to lead with integrity, Grant. But great question. Cannot agree more with the way you've placed it over here, because that's something that we've seen many times with the work that we've done with clients.
Great. Thank you so much, Ronnie.
Yep. And Davey, I saw your message, sorry, your question as well. Thank you. And again, Davey, I think you're being open by just sharing with us that you're having a bad headache. So it doesn't matter. I think that's fantastic. And you're right. Look, it's not easy for any of us, no matter our age, whether we're a bit more senior in the organization or whether we're new to the organization, no matter what it is, it's a very common human feeling or reaction to not want to open up. Because of that fear of being burnt, because of that fear of being looked at upon as weak. And as leaders, there is a greater amount of pressure for us to not be as open as we'd like to be. But Davey, as you've highlighted over here, you found that being open has allowed you to better connect with people. And what I've seen with our own experience, with clients we've worked with, even with my own personal experience, when I have put up my hand and said, look, you do this job much better than I do. I need to learn from you, or help me understand how I can support you. In circumstances like that, it really helps us to move forward to the next level. And as I said earlier on, leave your ego at the door, as difficult as it is. What you will find, guys, as you go through this and focus more on the collective good as opposed on your own personal motivations, you will find those personal rewards come in much quicker and much more significantly.
You talked, Ronnie, about every one of us taking responsibility in whatever we do to be a leader, and to have that right attitude, that right mindset, and to be considerate and empathetic of others. How important do you think these qualities are in the senior leadership teams in companies today?
Very important. Guys, do me a favor. When you have time, Google empathy and leadership and just look at the number of results that point towards the fact a leader who has a high degree of empathy will naturally be one who is very authentic. A leader who is in an organization and a leader who has a high degree of empathy, you will see the organizations they're in are thriving as a result of that, right? A leader who has a high degree of empathy, have a look one level down or two levels down even. You will see team members who have been with that leader for a considerable amount of time. And that's all around why? Because of that ability to communicate with the right intentions, to develop, foster that trust, to, through empathy, be able to not only build trust, but promote accountability, because now it's not just about the leader doing things and then telling or directing the subordinates or team members to do as he says or as she says. It's really about, okay, what can I do to make you get to that level, right? So I feel it is absolutely critical, and more so now, Victor, in this current climate. We've all seen the reports on the internet, in the news, about how the leaders who have been able to take organizations through these last 2 years and come out of it unscathed, or really looking like the guiding lights they are, they all have that same common quality around empathy, around being able to communicate with the right intent, and about having that infinite mindset.
Yeah, and I'm a firm believer that these skills are absolutely essential for corporate leaders today, because they then enable the ability for them to co-create and co-sustain the right kind of environment, what we call positive workplace culture, that enables people to succeed, that removes the horrible issues of people being bullied or undermined at work, or worse, sexually harassed. That with engaged teams, you're more likely to be commercially successful and have happy repeat customers. And as you mentioned, that whole process, of course, then feeds into not only the attraction of talent to come and work for a business, but also the retention of that talent. And it's confirming in a very real sense. And I honestly think this is the big challenge. And you're right. I think the pandemic has given us that silver lining that more and more leaders have struggled with challenges and the same kind of mental well-being issues that members of their teams have, because of the universality of the experiences that everybody's gone through and is still going through. And I think that is a sign of, you know, the maturing of the human species. At least we all hope so.
Yeah.
I don't see any more questions in the chat. Is there anybody with a question?
Yeah.
Yes,
Victor. Yeah. If you can allow me. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes. Good morning, Ronnie.
Hey,
I really enjoy your presentation. It's so inspiring. I just have two comments.
Sure.
Personally, I feel that the problem we have in today's world is we have very few role models of leaders who are actually leading with integrity. Right now, at this moment, in the midst of this pandemic. So if you can point to me one person, especially politician, right? That is really leading with integrity. I think it's really a rare species, like what Victor has mentioned. Second is, I think a lot of people, or rather leaders, they have problem doing this. Has this fear of whether, if we tell the truth, can people handle it?
Yeah.
Yeah. If you, let's say, I tell the truth to my own bosses, can they handle it? Can they handle the truth?
Yeah.
Right. So I think over time we all learn that it's safer not to speak up. That's my own experience.
Yeah, I agree. And Corinne, thanks for sharing that. I see where you're coming from, you know, and as you say, you can't handle the truth. I'm thinking of the movie already. But yes, it is challenging. There are very few role models, Corinne. One thing I would again say and point out, we talk about political leaders, especially in these last 2 years, right? Because they've all had the opportunity to shine, but most of them haven't been able to rise to the challenge as we, the public, feel they should have. Yeah, okay. But that's a different discussion altogether. Now, if we think about it, why are there so few? Are there really so few role models? I would submit there are few role models in the public eye. But here's another thing I would like all of you to think about. Look around you. A leader with integrity does not have to be in a managerial or leadership position. Someone who displays all the elements of authenticity, of being open to you, of having the right ability to communicate with you, in my book, that's a great role model to have around us, right? So yes, it's true in the public eye, and if you just do the numbers, those guys perhaps are not as many as we'd like them to be. On your second point, Corinne, we do that. We all build up this defensive layers around us because we've been burned before, because we know that we've tried it before in another situation and the outcome was not what we planned. And again, I'll share my own experience as well. I mean, I was guilty of not listening when one of my team members said that to me many years ago, shared their thoughts and perspectives many years ago. And I found myself to be in the receiving end when I was trying to communicate certain things to one of my bosses a few years ago, right? When we talk about integrity, at the end of the day, and I know I'm being a bit controversial over here, I know that might be few, shaking of their heads. At the end of the day, if we put aside office politics, if we put aside, the egos of the different individuals around us who are all ambitious to try to get to the next level in the organization, next level in the organization, and next level in the organization, what I would ask you this is, what would you be pleased or happy with? Not just you, Corinne, I'm just saying to everyone. What will you be more comfortable with? Do you want to sacrifice your values or compromise on your values and ethics in order to reach that upper echelon of the organization? Or will you be more content? Will you be more at peace with yourself? If you know that everything you do at work and at home, is very much aligned with the right values, you are communicating in the best way possible, and at the end of the day, you are showing a greater degree of integrity. To me, I would want to be with that person. I would want to be around those sort of individuals. And all these other individuals in leadership positions or managerial positions, they should not matter to me. They won't matter to me. As long as I do my work, I've done what I'm comfortable with, what I'm confident that I did my best, I am happy and at peace with that. And that's something I would ask all of us to consider, because quite often it is this resentment, it is this lack of contentment where it shouldn't be, that we put on ourselves, that leads to us being a bit more closed about sharing and about interacting with the different individuals. Yeah, so Corinne, think about that. I know that's helped me, and I feel that for any one of us, it's really about setting aside all of these things and think about how you as an individual can improve and contribute in a positive way.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, given my work and interaction with students, I work at NTU, and previously I spent 13 years in NUS.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you all are very aware of this very famous Monica Bay case.
Yep.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
we are really in the heat managing that crisis, actually, back in the office.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of hard truths learned from the Monica Bay case. I mean, she really stood up, leading with integrity.
Yeah.
Because she blurred the whole thing out, right? Of course, she created a lot of things that we need to follow up subsequently.
Yeah.
And really, you have to admire her courage for speaking up. But of course, she might also suffer some backlash, right? Question is, which organization would dare to hire her?
Yeah.
After doing what she has done.
So, sorry to interrupt, but my question then to that question is, would you want to work for an organization that wouldn't want to hire her because of that? Right?
Yes.
That's what I would say. That's what, if I was Monica, and again, it's easier said than done. I'm not saying, guys, wow, we have, thousands of choices, but still, then you have to ask yourself, maybe the initial, that lure of that position and the pay is so great, and we go, oh, I should not have done this, I should have done that, I should have kept my mouth shut. Maybe it will cause us to think about that and feel that way, but that's short term, that's momentary. In the long run, I would submit that if she had gone into that organization that already had hesitations around hiring her, she wouldn't be she wouldn't be in that organization for too long. One way or the other, one party will be found out and will make that decision to move away. So yeah. I see one message from Gindo. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Gindo, your name.
Yes, that's
again,
correct.
A wonderful perspective, understanding that people are different. Absolutely. I mean, look at this panel of participants we have over here. Different people from different backgrounds, different nationalities, different ethnic groups. And everyone has their own unique behavior. That's, that you identify a bit more with that particular culture and that, and that particular individual. So again, goes back, how would we as leaders handle such a diverse environment? Well, again, that awareness, being a bit more open, having that thought that our opinions don't matter, reducing the bias, reducing what I call the experience bias on our part, right? Being able to take in, and if someone does or says something that we don't like or which is not positive for us to hear, does that mean they're wrong? I would submit, no, it's their perspective. Where it would serve us is if we can understand where they're coming from, understand that origin story, understand the story behind that emotion that they're just displaying, understanding the limitations in how they may be communicating a message, especially if it's of a different culture. We all learn English. Those of us who grew up in Singapore all learn English because that was, primary part of our education system. But that doesn't mean that we all can communicate in English as effectively as we would like to. Some of us still feel more comfortable throwing in some other words from our own languages to communicate that word. And sometimes there isn't that appropriate word in English to be able to communicate that. So understanding them, good way for you to develop the relationship. And yes, it's also, that's where the empathy comes in, because when you recognize the cognitive empathy, you recognize this person is from this culture. You recognize that from that culture, they may respond in a certain way. Some of you may know this, but the Dutch are famous for being very direct. But for a lot of us in Singapore, if we come across a Dutch person and that Dutch person says to us, just being very truthful, that you made a mistake there, we go, oh my God, he's accusing me, and we suddenly cringe and all that. And if we pause and think, here's a Dutchman, he said that, he's just stating a fact. Okay, then we have the ways to be able to recognize and then go through and process that situation. So yeah, absolutely empathy plays a big part in it, but it's that awareness, it's that ability to be open, to take in and understand and agree that there are multiple perspectives to any situation.
Thank you, Ronnie.
Welcome.
Ladies and gents, we've run out of time. I just want to thank you all for your presence, and I want to thank you for your questions. But I particularly want to thank Ronnie for another really good session. And I guess to sum it all up, we all need to be aware of our impact and effect on others. And we all need to start from the basis of trying to treat others as we would like to be treated. And yes, we're all different. And yes, we've all got different histories, journeys, experiences, some of which have scarred us, some of which have inspired us, some of which have enabled us. But at the end of the day, we're all just humans, and we're imperfect, and we will make mistakes, and we'll keep making mistakes. But if we can keep learning and keep realizing that impact we have on other people, then I think we'll all be in better shape. So mindfulness at home, at work, and the tools that Ronnie has shared are really helpful for all situations at all times. So Ronnie, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Also want to thank Rita for all her support and help and input. So ladies and gentlemen, take good care of yourselves, stay safe, stay cheerful. There are more good leaders out there than you might think. And we'll see you again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day and to your week.
You too.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Ronnie. Thank you, Victor.
Thanks, Brad.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.